Gatekeeper, open the portals between the gods and mortals. Power freely flows as our magic grows.
Mighty Thor, Stormbringer, wielder of Mjolnir, we have witnessed your recent battles in Jotunheim. Now we ask your presence in Midgard. Attend this recording and protect us. In turn, we offer you ale to slake your thirst. Accept our offering.
Accept our offering.
Hey, I'm Aaron.
And I'm Jonathan.
And you're listening to Part the Mist,
a podcast by a pair of ADF druids here in Portland, Oregon. Man, I really wish I could... You don't have to hand me, like, the written form of this. For some reason, this is going to be like the running joke. For the next 8 years, I'm still not going to be able to figure out our title sequence.
It's going to be like the Mojo and Sparrow. It took them years before they were finally able to like speak together on point. So this is our Mojo and Sparrow moment.
Yes. Yes. So how are you doing, Aaron?
Oh, I'm doing all right. Getting prepared. Well, did we mention that in the bonus podcast about the changes happening in the Grove?
I think we did. I think the fact that you are, in fact, the senior druid.
Yeah. So I'm getting kind of mentally prepared to start taking on the reins and working on that. Mm-hmm.
But they haven't gotten rid of me yet.
No.
They're still stuck with me.
Well, Jonathan's going to be our liturgist.
Yes.
And our PR person.
So essentially, I took all the fun jobs that the senior druid did, and now I'm doing that. And Aaron,
that's okay. You took a lot of heavy lifting jobs.
Yeah, well, for me that's fun. See, I like the liturgy part. I just didn't like. I like people, but I have a hard time working in small group dynamic. I'm great with big group, but small group dynamic I'm pretty awful with. So I know, Aaron, you are much better than me in this because you are much more neutral. And you don't get the whole Tuscan Raider, that anger when people do silly things.
Well, that's I kind of may look at both sides of the story before making judgments, which I think makes a good leader, hopefully. So
yeah, well, we shall see. Don't worry, you're okay. You have like
it's only 2 years.
It's only 2. See, I got out when my term was only a year. So
well, but you also were organizer for 2 years before that.
Don't
so me. How are you doing, Jonathan?
I'm doing spectacular. I finally got a new job. Here's a pro tip to any of you guys out in the technology field. When you give your 2 or 3 week notice, a lot of the times they will just end your employment right there, and then you have to fight unemployment. So that 2 weeks notice thing necessarily working in like the semiconductor industry, not necessary anymore.
Well, I think that applies for a lot of jobs. If you're thinking about shifting jobs, which I am not, by the way, make sure you do your research about the best way to do that. Because I know I've seen in a lot of places a lot of people just don't give 2 weeks notice anymore.
Yeah. Other than that, I am going to the next week. So we're releasing this on December 1st. This is the November 28th right now. Mm-hmm. On December 3rd, I'm going to be heading up to Seattle to work with a couple of folks up there for their Norse Yule and maybe potentially getting a new grove started up there. Who knows?
Sweet.
Mm-hmm.
So moving on a little bit, our deity of the occasion today was Thor, which you may know from Marvel fame.
Oh, gosh.
However,
he's not an alien. He's not an alien. No.
Thor, he's a god of, he's a storm god within the Norse tradition. He's definitely known as very much of a warrior god, a protector of the Aesir, which are one of the branches of the heathen gods. And that's something that we'll actually be getting into a little bit more in the podcast. Well, in the body of the podcast here.
Yes. Yeah, and I asked some questions, and I'm going to say I'm ignorant to the heathenry. So I asked some silly questions. which I think some of them were good to ask. Some of those we might wanted to always ask, but we're afraid to because it make you look kind of like pie in your face. So I'll take the pie to the face. That's okay. And they went into detail about the difference between what you call the Norse Hearth culture versus heathenry. We went pretty much good into that. I think.
Yeah, and I mean, we've been saying within our growth that we practice the Hearth culture. I think we might need to change our terminology here in the future.
But we have to be kind of careful because with heathenry up in Oregon, it's a little different here, but we're not going to get into that. That's neither here or there. So I think we can still say Norse.
Okay.
Hearth culture, just because what we're using is actually Norwegian.
Okay.
Yeah. Perfect. So anyway, we're gonna throw in the middle of the interviews with both Marci and John. We'll go ahead and throw in another song just to break it up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so sit back, listen. Anything else you'd like to say before we start the interview, Art?
No, and enjoy.
All right, folks, we are here with a couple of special guests once more to help us out with our previously titled Norse, now titled Heathenry episode. Would you folks like to introduce yourselves? Jan, we'll start with you.
That's because I go by Jan sometimes. So, hey,
Jan.
Hello everyone. My name is John, or Jan Tiered, and I am the host of the Gifts of the Weird podcast. I'm also an ADF member for about 10 years, and I practice a heathen tradition within the ADF practices, and lead a kindred down here as well as a grove, Coast Oak Grove in San Diego, California.
Hi, I'm Marci. I'm also an ADF member and maintain a heathen practice within that. And I don't do anything really special beyond that. So.
All right. Well, what got you guys interested in heathenry? John?
Well, it started for me, I joined, when I became a pagan, I was drawn to the Celtic, more specifically the Irish traditions, because I was really involved with the Irish community here in San Diego, and it just seemed like a natural progression for me. However, and then when I was at Pantheacon in 2006, I stumbled into, not because I was drunk, but just by haphazardly, into the ADF hospitality suite, met Isaac Bonwitz and Kirk and a bunch of other of the folks at the time there that were hosting the suite, and found out about ADF, and I thought, wow, this really works for me, and this is really cool. About a year and a half or years later, I started feeling this strange draw to Freya and Odin, and I was like, what's going on here? And lo and behold, I really felt like the Celtic gods and goddesses were doing a handoff. And they were handing me to the gods and goddesses of my heritage. My heritage, I'm Dutch, first generation American, born of a Dutch mother, and so I'm really exclusively into the Germanic tribal base of the northern Germanic lands there, and the lowlands called the Netherlands. And I just felt like at one point it was like Briege and Lou were just like saying, hey, come with us. And I'm like, okay, what's going on? And next thing I know, they're like, here, he belongs to you now. And they handed me over to Freya and Odin. I was like, what? So that kind of started my path. And I've since just sort of been reading up on that and following that. I've maintained relationships with the Celtic gods and goddesses as well as the Greek that I've worked with before. They've been good friends, and they've done a lot of good stuff with me, so I'm really pleased with that. But I've pretty much exclusively worked with the heathen gods and goddesses of my ancestors.
All right. And Marci, how did you come to heathenry?
So I came to heathenry almost as soon as I came to paganism in my mid-teens. As soon as I realized that this was an option, I was just like, oh, well then those are the gods that I want to worship. And as soon as I did that, it was obvious to me that I went and I followed Woden, and I wander, and, well, he's okay with wandering, so sometimes I go and play elsewhere, and then I come home, and then I go and play elsewhere, and then I come home. But it has always been the Hearth culture of my heart. So, I'm really straightforward.
All right, so right off the bat, now I know very little about this specific Hearth culture. So, what is the difference? Well, okay, so when we say Norse, now we talked a little bit earlier. That's not necessarily correct. Instead, it's a heathen tradition. Could one of you guys like to kind of go into the differences, or maybe tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, Norse as a term is almost exclusively, it's linguistically related to the modern word Norska, which is the language of Norway, what we in English would call Norwegian. So, to an extent, when you say Norse, what you are saying is Norwegian. Now, that's not what you're saying. You're talking about all of the Scandinavian and Icelandic historical heathenry at that point, usually. But that's linguistically where that term comes from, and sort of what it points to, where heathenry in general is used as a more general term for the Germanic pagan traditions.
Yeah, and it pretty much involves the pantheon of the gods and goddesses of the Aesir and the Vanir, the Jotuns, and the dwarves and elves of the northern Germanic and Scandinavian people groups that inhabited those northern areas. And the differences between the different practices under the heathen umbrella would be similar in description as one might say the descriptive practices of the Celtic peoples under the Celtic umbrella. You have specific Irish pantheons and Welsh and those types of minor differences that are similar in a lot of practices, and maybe even some of the gods are the same in each pantheon or each people group, but they have a slightly different name or something. But so that's where you get some of the differences under the heathen umbrella, whereas you have the Nordic practitioners who are more practice some of the traditions that were established in the very far northern lands, and then you've got the AngloSaxon practitioners who practice things as they developed in the British Islands area, as well as the Asatru and Vanatru, which is more the Vanik people. So there's a lot of minor things. We basically follow pretty much the same gods and goddesses, or the pantheon, but there's just some minor ways that not separate, but just differentiate how we practice. And to me, that just describes pretty much the same as the peoples from the ancient days. Is you could go 3 mountains away and you have a people group that are worshiping similar gods and goddesses, but in an entirely different way.
So, something that I've always kind of been curious about is, if you guys know, is how did heathenry become the term that we use for this, the umbrella term for this, group of, what's the words I'm looking for? Let me try asking that again. How did heathenry become the umbrella term we use for these Scandinavian culture practices?
Well, actually, it's been the term since our language, English, was Anglo-Saxon. When you look at the Anglo-Saxon texts that are outlawing native pagan practice, they all speak of Heathen practices, of heathen practices. So it's been in our language for literally as long as our language has existed. And then it is used to differentiate from pagan, which comes from paganus, which is the Latin equivalent, but there it is.
All right.
And if I'm not entirely misinformed, heathen kind of means, doesn't it, Marci, the practice of the folk or the practice of the common people or something like that, as far as the way...
It sort of means country.
Country folk, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there is also the Heathen practice would also be country bumpkin practice, and there are cases where what is being outlawed is clearly don't be a nincompoop, and it's not don't go worship the wells and the trees. It's actually go to the doctor, man.
Yeah. It eventually became a term adopted by Christianity, when Christianity took over, to just mean anything non-Christian. That's how you often hear, especially non-pagan or non-heathen people use it as like, you heathen, meaning you're doing something that's out of the religious norm. But for us, this is the religious norm, and it's the way we identify.
Right.
Go ahead, Art.
No, we both started talking at once, and I forgot what I was going to say now.
Well, I can ask a question. It seems like there's a lot of hot button issues going on in the heathen community, and there's always one side of information, and then I myself don't know the whole picture. Now, I know that, I hate to bring this up, I know that with the religion itself, it has nothing to do with white supremacy, but that seems to be pretty much a hot topic issue right now, or hot button issue right now.
It kind of always is.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Go for it.
Oh, no, go ahead, Marci. I was just agreeing with you. Unfortunately, it seems to be one of the religions that people with that type of mentality like to glom onto to be a platform for their bigotry. And our practices are by all means not bigoted. Anyone who does any study of the people groups of the North, just like the Celtic people, there were people of all races that were free people and servants and workers of the land and all aspects of it through trade and conquering of other tribes, and people who just thought, hey, I like living up in the North where it's cooler, so I'm going to live there. And they've always been accepted, and as long as they are a vital part of the community and give into the community, then they've been accepted. So it is not inherently part of the religion. It's just people that tend to want to separate themselves out, and that's a way that they do that to make themselves have a unique perspective, I guess, or something. But I can't find that they have any historical, archaeological, or even religious founding to support what they say, or what that practice is, as far as the lore or anything else.
Absolutely. One of my favorite stories in the lore is that Heimdall wandered the earth for a period and fathered children in all of the social classes.
Absolutely, yeah.
and so everyone is descended from Heimdall, sooner or later.
So let's talk a little bit about the source. Now, I know that the source material, I only know of two source materials. Is it the Edda and the Poetic Edda, or are those the same? See, I'm sorry, I don't know a whole lot.
There's the Prose Edda and the Poetic Edda, and those are the two primary literary sources.
Yes. Those are the two primary literary sources, and what we have to understand about those is they were written by a Christian monk, or transcribed by a Christian monk, supposedly from texts that he had found in, what is it, Marci, about the 13th century? So
that's actually inaccurate.
Oh, is it?
Yes. Or at least there are a number of different versions of those stories, and it's not entirely clear that they actually come from Christian monks. As an easy example, the Prose Edda is decidedly not written by a monk. It's written by Snorri Sturluson, who was a law speaker. And I love this particular stupid little story, I'm sorry, and whose father had his eye put out by the priest's wife because he was always going on about Odin, and she was all like, I'm gonna make you like your hero, man. And this is actually why Snorri got sent to law school, is that the priest, in recompense, paid for Snorri's education.
You're right, and my apologies for throwing the term monk in there. The truth is, though, is that the texts came about around the 12th or 13th century, and they were transcribed by Snorri Sturluson, who had apparently some texts at the time that he transcribed over. So, as far as I know, we don't have anything that goes really beyond that. So we're kind of working from those stories and texts, and we're able to pull a lot of the things that we that we base our current practices on from those tales and those stories, and our understandings from the gods and goddesses come from those as well. So they're a very valuable source, or a foundational source of where we can start our relationships with the gods and goddesses.
Do we happen to know why we don't really have any sources from beforehand? Because we know they have a written language, we know they have runes, and we know there's a rock somewhere that says, like, Sven was here or something. So,
I don't have a theory.
Okay.
I think, kind of like the Celts, people just didn't write all that stuff down. It was just passed on orally. It was much of an oral tradition. And although there were writings, like you said, the extant writings that we can find in runes are Sigurd was here, or it was a tombstone or a marker saying, go this way if you want to go to this village. So probably anything that was written down on things that were very fragile and dissipated with time, or were destroyed when Christianity kind of took over and destroyed a lot of the old ways. Mm-hmm. And that's my theory. I don't think we have any real way to find out.
Okay. Well,
there's just a lot of old poetry that was lost, and it's true in any of the language groups. There is only one surviving manuscript of Beowulf, and it was caught in a fire. So just a lot of text has been lost over the years.
And it's interesting. There's a couple of stories in the Eddas where it's like it goes on with the story, and then it says, and then we don't have anything from this point on, and then it picks up again. It says, but we have this here. So there's like this blank space. It's like someone ripped pages out, but Snorri recorded it that way, or some people or other writers have recorded it that way. That like, well, this is all that we have. We don't have the rest of this song or the rest of this tale. So it just kind of ends.
I am the Firebird. I am his daughter. I am the Firebird's child. I am the Firebird. I am his daughter. And like the flame, I am wild, 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 wild. I am the Firebird. I am his daughter. I am the Firebird's child. I am the Firebird, the boldest song you've ever heard. Join in the dance and make it wild, wild, wild. Join in the dance and make it wild. To see a maiden dance around the fire is not so strange, but fire dances around the limbs of this uncommon maid.
I'm Phaedra Bonowitz, and you're listening to Part the Mist, a Druid podcast created and hosted by the members of Columbia ADF.
Marci, when I was over at your house, I don't know, 6 months ago, you were showing me these. Were those the Rune poems you were showing me? That maybe didn't translate into English so well, or just didn't make really any sense?
Well, the Rune Poems they're, in my opinion, the Rune Poems exist as sort of an educational tool. They're a type of abecedarium. They're there to pass on the meaning of the rune and give sort of an idea, but they also exist within a cultural context that we don't have anymore, and you sort of have to dig into that cultural context if you're going to make sense of the poem.
Now, are these? I can't remember. Were they Anglo-Saxon or were they Old Norse?
There are three major extant rune poems. There's a fourth minor extant rune poem, but it doesn't appear in this story. The Anglo-Saxon rune poem, which is where I started because Anglo-Saxon is my linguistic background. The Old Norse rune poem and the Old Icelandic rune poem.
And I think with that, maybe we could talk about the different cultures under the heathen banner. I think, because I don't know a whole lot of the different types. Maybe you guys could talk a little bit about that.
Marci, you want to start with you're Anglo-Saxon, right?
Sure. So we've got relatively little text for Anglo-Saxon heathenry. We've got a whole pile of charm poems, many of which are actually very heavily Christianized, and a few references to the Norse gods. We know to the gods, and a number of references to either practices, often in the negative. Don't go and worship at the wells of the heathens. Don't pray to trees. Don't burn sacrifices in the fire. Don't dance naked in the fields and wear animal masks. That aren't even necessarily that don't necessarily even differentiate between native Celtic and the influx Germanic tribes, and a number of texts from southern England referencing the horrible, horrible behavior of people living in central England under Danelaw, much of which boils down into, and they worship Odin and Fricka and Thunar. Oh noes. And I'm serious, that is basically the whole thing. We know that they are worshiping these gods under these names, but we don't know anything else about it.
Yeah, and I think because it took so long for Christianity to permeate north, some of the very furthest regions of the northern regions of Europe were some of the last to acquiesce to Christianity. A lot of the traditions and things we have from like Iceland or even far in the Nordic region, the Norwegian or Finland area, we still have a lot of stuff that we can kind of look towards. So there's a really healthy Icelandic heathen tradition going on. And actually, they're building a temple in Iceland to the gods, and they've got a national religion again, a heathen religion recognized in Iceland. So they're really good at being able to recreate and for their people the traditions there and pull that along. When it comes down to some of the modern interpretations, we're kind of stuck with interpretations. We're trying to reconstruct what we can from the Eddas and any other stories that we can find from grave digs and archaeological finds to try to recreate what we think our ancestors practice, and I think we're kind of a lot of folks are often saying this is what they did, and I'm like, you can't really say that because we don't know, but it's nice to guess. But we're just recreating, and for me personally, and this is just me, I'm like, you know what? Take what we can from the Eddas and what we find, and then build a practice today that's meaningful to us, because that's what our ancestors had, was practices that were modern and meaningful to them at the time. And to me, it's all about relationships with the gods and how do we connect with the gods. And so under that, we have several types of heathen practices. We have Asatru, which is the folks that really connect with the gods and goddesses of the Aesir, such as Woden or Odin, Thor or Donar, etc. And then you have Vanatru, which is the folks who really connect with the Vanic gods, Frey, Freya, Njord, Nerthus, and the other gods and goddesses associated with them. There's a group of people called Rokatru, and they're folks that follow and honor the Jotuns, the giants. And then there's probably any other number of practices and groups in between, in addition to the AngloSaxon and that I'm aware of that are practicing under the branch of heathenry today.
So do we actually do we know anything about what they might have done when they were worshiping the gods in days of yore?
Wow.
We have a lot of subtle textual clues. We have the images of pouring offerings over stones. We know that offerings were that material goods were offered up to statues. We certainly know that material goods were buried as grave goods, and also sometimes just apparently dumped in bogs.
The Celts too.
Yes,
Exactly.
the Celts did that too. It was apparently a thing. I don't understand that one.
It's a good place to hide a body.
Yeah, no one wrote. There's as far as I know, and as far as I've done my study, no one's ever been able to produce a book of ritual that was written in 800 AD, 800 BCE, or Common Era. So we don't know exactly what they did. As Marci said, we're taking clues from references in the stories that we have preserved in the Eddas, that we can say, well, okay, there's this mention of this pouring of blood over the stone, or this god pole here, or even things that we can find in the grave goods, that archaeological finds where we can find jewelry or other things that we probably surmise were used as ritual items, and then that's what it's kind of that reconstruction. And I kind of call it the Jurassic Park of religion, because we have certain things, and then we know where we are today. We're using frog DNA to try to build a dinosaur in between.
So should I ask the question? Should I ask that really annoying question that seems to... Okay. So I got
You can ask away.
All right.
Ask the annoying question,
Please.
please.
Get people to get like roll their eyes or just go, "Oh gods." So this is a real ignorant question on my part. The people who follow the heathen path, who are really, really into the Vikings, and really have that.
The Vikings were so awesome, warrior, hoo-ha-ha.
But I know from other Indo-European cultures that you can't just have one class of people to function as a society. But it seems like, at least in America, that Viking kind of warrior mentality seems to permeate through heathenry, at least what I have seen.
Well, I have opinions, but my opinions are unkind.
Well, all right. I had an ignorant question, so maybe it deserves an unkind answer. I don't know.
I don't think it's unkind towards you, Jonathan.
Oh, well,
no.
Well, Marci, you know what? I think you guys could be free to share your opinions on this. I don't think you're going to get backlash. I mean...
Well, and we're totally able to cut out anything that you might not want the public to hear.
Just speak slowly, so that way I can cut that stuff out. So, Marci, since you said something, would you like to answer?
So, for me, and it sounds like also for John, this is a path that contains a lot of work. There are a lot of things that I care about, and I do, and I research, and I also practice. I mean, I am, despite the fact that I describe myself as a research pagan, that's not all of what I do. My practice is fairly active. And then there are people who don't have enough in their lives, and they want to be Vikings. And being Vikings doesn't take a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't require that they learn any other languages or read any big books or even actually that they do any actual Viking things. As Jonathan knows, I'm an active martial artist, and that is a part of my spiritual practice. And I do that twice a week. If I skip a day, recently I skipped a whole 2 weeks. I had pneumonia, and that's why I would skip. But so you have this, like, they don't have enough in their lives, and they aren't doing the work, and therefore Vikings, which are very easy to latch on to, are a brilliant image. Vikings.
Yeah, I agree with you, Marci. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that we look and see that, but they do have a very deep connection as well, or they're very intent. But I think a lot of it's the Hollywoodization of a group that's easy to tell stories about, and it appeals to the base nature that a lot of people have of wanting to be powerful, wanting to be different, wanting to, in some cases, exert a air of I'm this because I'm a Viking, or I'm a heathen, and it's this brosatru mentality where it's in a ritual.
I'm sorry, did you just say brosatru?
Brosatru, yes.
I love it.
I love that word. That's beautiful.
It's how loud can you yell Thor or Odin's name in a bloat? It's a lot about the outward showing. And when I was a Christian, I saw a lot of that in Christianity, where it was, how loud can I scream amen? How quickly can I run down to the altar and get my life right to the tune of Just As I Am? Things like that. And, it's trying to cut through that vision and that Hollywoodization of a culture of people that most of them were just farmers and doctors and people going about life trying to live their lives, and sometimes it involved raiding. And let's face it, going out and raiding and murdering people just to steal their silver is not honorable. I don't think that's an honorable trait to emulate. defending your land and going out and defending your land is honorable. But some of what the Vikings TV show and some of that thing is perpetuating is just go out and murder Christians and murder people because you want their land or their silver. That's not honorable, and I don't think that that's a good trait to emulate.
Hear, hear.
Yeah, I
Yes.
can generally agree with that. Yeah, but I'm gonna since I kind of took us down that road, I'm gonna kind of lead us back to the more scholarly side here. Let's talk a little bit about some of the main deities, because we know that the Greeks had their pantheon, and so did the Rome and the main 12 or 13. Would you guys mind talking a little bit about the different gods and with their different names and such? Because I know there were some names, like Thor goes by different names as well, and I didn't quite understand that.
Yeah. Well, on continental Germanic, which I think went over to the Anglo-Saxon side, didn't it, Marci, is Odin is known as Woden. Odin is more the Nordic name, and Woden is the continental Germanic name that we know for that god, and Donar for Thor, Freya for Freya, Frigg for Freya, or Frigga for Freya. So depending on where you are in the language base it was how the name was pronounced. But yeah, we do have some main gods and goddesses and other gods and goddesses that are kind of on the sideline of history that many of us try to honor and bring back as much as we can. So Odin or Woden being the chief of gods or the father of gods, and before him we kind of think was the god Tyr, the god of righteousness and justice. And then Thor, of course, being the giant slayer, the defender of Asgard. Frey and Freya, the twins. Frey being the fertility god, and Freya being the goddess of sorcery and magic and a host of other things, who were exchanged in a hostage exchange in order to end the war between the Aesir and the Vanir. Frigga, being the wife of Odin, is generally associated with Hearth and home, and those areas. So those are some of the main gods and goddesses. And then, of course, there's the infamous Loki, we have a lot of varying opinions on within the heathen community on Loki as well. Marci?
I agree with everything he just said. I'm just going to run with that. That sounds good.
I want to ask about Loki, because he seems to come up a lot in a lot of discussions I've had with people. Loki being allowed in certain bloats and not allowed is I understand that he is kind of like an agent of change for the Hearth cult, for the heathen Hearth culture. That he is there. I know he's a trickster and he kind of gets things moving. But why such the negative view of Loki?
Well, because Loki is directly responsible for the death of Balder, who is the only god in the entire pantheon who may be entirely nice.
Balder the Beautiful.
Balder is the god of really nice guys, and Loki is directly responsible for his death.
So Loki's kind of not Loki. So Balder was kind of like Ned Stark.
Maybe not as vicious and.
Oh no, Ned Stark was the good guy.
Ned Stark. Okay, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, and then the kind of the asshole kid was the one who had him killed.
Yeah.
Now, in Loki's defense, on Exogrammaticus, Loki doesn't actually appear in the death of Balder. It's entirely between him and Hodor. So, but then we wouldn't have Loki the murderous bastard. So,
yeah, Loki I view Loki as an agent of change, necessary to what we have to do in order to progress and change. And let's face it, most of the gifts the gods have, including Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, would not have been had it not been for Loki. However, that said, in addition to the death of Balder in many references, Loki is also an agent in the deception that causes Ragnarok, which is the end of the reign of the Aesir and the Vanir as we know it now, bringing the end of all ends and the start of the new world. So, again, there you have the agent of change, things dying and move on. I think when Christianity took over, they have their devil, so Loki was the easy one to kind of put those attributes onto, and it kind of permeated for a while. So within heathen communities, yeah, there are some folks that would request that Loki not be honored in a blow for those reasons. There are people who do connect with Loki because Loki does do good things as well as mischievous and malicious things. In the Troth, in official Troth, which is a sister or as a heathen organization, much like ADF, in official troth bloats and ceremonies, it is requested that Loki not be honored out loud. However, what people do in their own private practices and even at Troth Moot, which is a camp out, there are holy vays or holy places allowed for Loki. So he's there. He's a part of the pantheon. We can't just cut him out and ignore him as if he doesn't exist.
And I agree with that completely. For me, it has always been that in the lore, it is very explicit that Loki calls out the gods, that he and Odin are sworn blood brothers, and you cannot drink with Odin without drinking with Loki. And so if I'm going to invite Odin, I have to invite Loki.
There you go.
And I accept this as just, it's where I am. I can't have one without the other. There must be peanut butter to go with my chocolate.
So from I was watching this show on the History Channel way when it was still the History before aliens. That it was about the Christianization of Europe, and they briefly mentioned that Odin, that there was some parts in churches where Odin and Jesus were almost like buddies. During, like, there was images of them together, and like you were talking about Loki being kind of viewed as the devil, as that imagery as well.
Well, they were both hung from a tree.
There, yeah. That there was some references that was an easy correlation, being Odin who sacrificed himself, and being like, oh, look, Jesus, he sacrificed himself. There was some easy correlations going on there. At least.
Well, this is my opinion, Jonathan. Christianity being a Roman tradition or a Roman construct, they often, as they migrated forth, they would find the gods and goddesses of the people there and make the associations with their gods and goddesses, so that it was a way for people to identify with the gods and goddesses, and easier, or maybe not the Christianity, but even the pre-Christian Romans as they went through, and just associated, like, hey, you have Odin, we have Jupiter. You know, they're the same god or they're very similar because they're of equal stance and power. So I think when Christianity came through, that was the way that they were able to help the pagan or the people of the folk of the they were conquering to be able to convert to Christianity. They're saying, hey, you know, Loki, that's the devil, and Odin, you know, see, he's just like Jesus. See, they hung on a tree, they sacrificed themselves for their people, they were born again or they came back, things like that. So I kind of think that's where you get those associations from, is it's how can you convert people over from this by just saying, well, this is the same God, or this is a similar thing here.
Yeah, and I think that's what the documentary was pointing at.
Mm-hmm.
They're not, obviously they weren't the same stories, but yeah, it was the syncretizing these gods together. It's easier for people to understand, at least when they were going through the conversions.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, absolutely.
So, I'm probably getting close to wrapping up here, but what I'd like to know is how do you incorporate how do you use heathenry in your day-to-day practice? Like, I know, for example, Marci, you mentioned that your martial arts is a part of your spirituality. I don't know if that links back to the heathenry or not, but how might a modern pagan or a modern heathen incorporate the heathenry into their regular practice?
Well, for me, I do it like I did normally. When I see a beautiful flower or I see something going, I thank Frey or the land wights or nature spirits for what they've done. I try to connect myself to my world around me. I try not to separate my religious practices from my daily life. I integrate them so that I'm constantly thanking the gods or thinking on the gods or talking to the gods in and out. And that's one of the beautiful parts, and here's how I can connect it with ADF and the heathen SIG within ADF is that, the whole practice is just a part of my entire life. I mean, I don't have anything specific like Marci does where I do martial arts, but when I see the moon and the sun in the sky at the same time, I thank Mani and Sinna for their light. Mani and reflecting the light of Sinna. To me, that's a very magical and exciting experience. We're experiencing some rain right now in San Diego, and I'm thanking yours and Thor, Donar, for the rain. I just try to always make sure that my physical life, my physical activities, I acknowledge that it's not just something randomly happening, that the gods and goddesses and the elves and the dwarfs and the land wights and the Jotuns, even the giants, are all a part of it and significant in my life.
And I feel like, that's a big part of any spiritual practice is connecting your spiritual practice with your daily life and seeing seeing the vast majority of it as the gift it is from the gods and spirits. And then, for me, it's there's a level of being the person who should be in the stories. And that sounds very weird, but, I sort of look at parts of my job as I am a law speaker. I ensure that the rules exist and are followed and are sometimes bent. And that we all understand why the rules exist so that we can decide when we should bend them. And, sure, I do this at a corporate level and thank the gods that I don't have to decide whether or not, someone gets recompense for the death of their child. Who wants to do that? That sounds terrible.
Yeah.
But part of my job is to be something of a law speaker. And then there is, well, our heroes are all warriors, so go and be a warrior. And in that also, go and make sure your first aid certification is up to date. I'm not kidding. Those things are important too. The real way to be a hero: be there with your gloves and your bandages when someone needs you.
Yeah, exactly.
So before we just wrap this up, this is always a good, important question to ask. resources, some good books to recommend to some of our listeners.
We've already mentioned the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda. Do you have anything else you'd like to recommend?
I have a couple. I pulled a couple of books out. One is the Norse Myths by Kevin Crossley Holland. It's a very nice storytelling way that pulls a lot of the stories out of the Eddas and puts them into like a story reading format. Makes it a little bit easier to comprehend and actually tell around a fire and or a living room when you're having storytelling time. So it's the Norse Myths, and it's available on Amazon or any other book selling place fairly easily. As far as introduction to heathenry, Diana Paxson has a great book called Essential Asatru. There's a great book called the Dictionary of Northern Mythology by Rudolf Simek, Simek. That's an excellent resource for all types of things that you would hear heathens spout off the cuff and think that everyone understands, but most people will blink their eyes like a tree full of owls and say, "What are you talking about?" And then there's Our Troth by The Troth, Volumes 1 and 2, which is a great resource for practices as well as lore and history, just to name a few. And then there's plethoras of resources for rune and divination and scythe and magic and ritual and landwites and things by a variety of authors who've been around for the last 30 years, putting a lot of great works out.
Can you give me it was the Dictionary of what?
Northern Mythology by Rudolf Simek, Simek. Those are some of my go-to resources, right off the top of my head.
Marci, you got any resources?
When I'm looking for something, my first stop is Jacob Grimm's Teutonic Mythology.
There you go. That's a good.
Yes, when in doubt. And Jacob, one of the nice things about Grimm is that he will always provide all of his sources, and so you can go and look those up too.
Is that the Jacob Grimm?
That is the Jacob Grimm, as in the Brothers Grimm, as in all of the fairy tales that you ever heard as a child. Jacob Grimm was kind of crazy about the Germanic mythology. Is it Heimskringla Saga? Which is the history of the kings, Saxo Grammaticus. Like I said, I'm pretty old school. I go back to the primary sources as much as I can, as often as I can.
Okay, you're gonna have to spell that one for me. The Heim Wahaha.
I'm gonna have to I'm gonna have to Google that because I don't even know how to spell it.
All right, maybe
we can message us afterwards.
Yeah,
we can put that in the show notes. Hey, John, you have a podcast. Would you like to maybe speak a little bit about it for our audience? Maybe they'll go ahead and check it out.
Thank you very much. Absolutely, yeah. I have a heathen-related podcast called Gifts of the Weird. That's WYRD. Weird being loosely translated or usually loosely used as our fate or our just things that happen to us. I approach, and my co-host Lane, we approach the more non-brothatru way of looking at heathenry. So we really want to reach out to people who are just trying to learn and trying to figure out how does heathenry fit into their lives and how can they make it work in their lives in a modern context. And so those are some of the things that we're working on and some of the things we're pulling together. And we've been going about as long as Part the Myths. So we started about the same time, which is kind of exciting. And And you can find that on either on iTunes or on giftsoftheweird.podbean.com. And I try to get an episode out about every month, so I'm a little bit behind because I was on travel for most of October, and I've been having technical issues, so I'm trying to figure out how to get that going again. And we'll be back online soon. So in the meantime, I will have everyone connect and listen to Part the Miss when this gets up. That's really cool.
Excellent.
Awesome, thank you.
And Marci, you, me, and another member is going to be doing a Yule ritual coming up next week. It's next week, my gods.
Yes.
Really? Wow.
It's next weekend.
Going up to Seattle for a day, and we're going to, and who are the gods we're honoring? I know I'm awful. I should know this.
Njord and Skavi.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's now I've done ritual with Marci once, and this is sort of a new thing. Hopefully, we could be doing some of these rituals up there, in the future as well. So there's some good stuff happening, at least in the Pacific Northwest.
And I really think that if a person is following a certain pantheon, that they don't have to be only part of that pantheon. Especially within ADF, we have so many different traditions because we are pan-Indo-European that I think the gods work well together. And it's great to develop relationships with other gods and goddesses because, hey, you can't have too many friends, I think.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Right? And I've had some great experiences with as far south as the Greek gods. I haven't worked so much with the Romans. Those are folks that I would like to introduce myself to someday and work with them. But and I have a really good relationship with the Celtic gods. I find the Celtic and the heathen gods really like each other a lot. They work really well together. I know a lot of heathens who have very good relationships with the Morrigans. So it's, I just like to encourage folks that don't limit yourself into who will work with you or who you can work with. So make a lot of friends.
Yes.
And just as a side note, most gods work well with the Roman gods as long as they're paying their taxes.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had to go there. All right. Aaron, was there any questions you'd like to ask?
Just if there's any last words that you guys would like to get in before we close up here.
Well, for me, I'm just really pleased to be a part of folk and traditions where they can honor each other and respect each other's immutable traits and welcome each other in integrity and honor. And any folks that are in San Diego area, feel free to connect with me, and we can hook up for either a pub mood, or if we can even arrange a ritual or a bloat and just do things together, either with the Grove or with the Kindred or with folks of like-mindedness. I love working with other people, and I would just welcome folks to participate in that way, and just to keep reaching out and connecting with other folks within ADF and the heathen community.
And how can they reach out to you?
Well, I'll tell you what, you can email me at giftsoftheweird@gmail.com, and I'll be able to respond that way.
And that's weird, not spelled the English way, correct?
That's WYRD, Gifts of the WYRD. And I have Twitter @WeirdGifts, and also Facebook page. So people can connect with me in either of those ways.
Excellent. You got anything for us, Marci, before we go?
No, I think I'm okay. Thanks.
Being okay is okay.
That's okay by me.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you guys very much for being on the show. I think we'll be back with you guys hopefully in the future with some more advanced things. Once we, at least when I learn some more things, Marci, maybe you could sit down with me and talk to me and slap me against the head, side of the head, saying like, "Hey, you shouldn't have said this. But instead, you should say this." We can work on that for future episodes.
Thank you for this opportunity. It's really excellent to be working with you on a podcast and sharing this tradition with other folks. It's awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much for both of you coming on and talking with us. And we look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
What a great interview.
Indeed. It was so much fun getting to talk to John and Marci. And I just want to say again, thank you for coming on to the show. I hope you're listening to this.
And I apologize. I just had to ask the Viking question. Seeing somebody who's on the outside, I see it, I'm like, Vikings, I don't get. What's so fashionable? But I got a good answer.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, that's the whole point of us having these interviews and having, the more knowledgeable folks on is we are ignorant of these hearth cultures, so we are more than happy to get the opportunity to pick your brains. So.
And in the future, we might have the American hearth culture, which is the American hearth culture. We might have Hittite. We might have, we might have somebody who comes up for the Slavic, because we don't know these things. We're not ADF experts here.
Well, and we've reached the extent of the hearth cultures that we worship within our grove. So that's kind of the extent of our knowledge. Mm-hmm. So
at least when it comes to those different hearth cultures,
right? So we're going to go ahead and wrap things up here. We're actually going to skip our event calendar this time. Actually, we're going to be taking the event calendar segment out to make room for a new segment coming in 2017. So
it's very exciting, and it's something. I'll give a little bit of a taste. It's something from Kirk.
From Kirk Thomas.
Yes, so that will be coming on our next month's episode on January 1st.
But as always, if you do have events that you would like us to advertise, I think we're going to go ahead and extend that out, not just Pacific Northwest, but to ADF. If you have events you'd like us to advertise, let us know. We'll be happy to read something out or put your recording on our podcast. We're always happy to do that.
And just to let you guys know, we reach about 1,000 downloads a month. So if you're an ADF and have, even if it's the big festivals, a small festival, whatever, please let us know and we will advertise your event for free.
Absolutely. So, wow, okay, so I feel a little bit caught offhand now. I guess that closes us out. You can find us on iTunes. We are also on Stitcher and Podbean. We still have to get around to actually registering.
I did it.
That.
I did it.
Awesome. We're registered on Podbean now. So those are all the places you can listen to us. You can also reach out to us at ptmpod@gmail.com. Wow, that's the first time I gave the email today. And look for us on Facebook. We have a fan page and a group page, a Facebook group. So feel free to reach out to us and talk to us and start conversations and talk to each other and have all kinds of good fun.
And if you have any suggestions for upcoming shows, please send it to us as well. We'll be more than likely, because we have some good stuff lined up for 2017.
But we're always happy to to hear your suggestions as well.
All right, so I think that ends the show.
Mighty Thor, we thank you for your presence in this recording today.
Thor, we thank you.
All right, good night, folks.
Wise one,
Brave one,
sure one,
strong one, we bid you now hail and farewell. Go by the powers that brought you, go by the unweaving spell. As thy bright pentagram stay, depart ere the circle is gone.